lawmaking in the UK. Let's kick things off by zooming out and looking at the big picture. UK lawmaking is a bit like a pyramid, and at each level of this pyramid, different people create law in different ways. Now, at the very top there, we have Parliament, so this is the main law factory, and they churn out big, important laws called Acts of Parliament. Imagine laws like the Criminal Justice Act 2003. These are the heavyweights and always have the final say. If UK law were a game of Monopoly, Parliament would make the rules. So then next we can have the middle layer, and this would be when Parliament sometimes says, well, we're a bit busy, let's let somebody else handle the details. And that's where delegated legislation comes in. So government ministers and other bodies get power to make certain rules, like the police codes under PACE. It's like Parliament writes the main recipe, but lets someone else add the spices. And at the base of the pyramid there, we also have the judges. So through judicial precedent, which is also called case law, judges actually set legal principles in real cases. So, for example, in Donoghue versus Stevenson, which is the famous snail in the bottle case, here a single court decision can ripple out and guide future cases, kind of like when a teacher sets a classroom rule and then suddenly all the classes are having to follow it. And then don't forget, there's also an invisible hand at work, and in this case, international law. Treaties like the European Convention on Human Rights influence UK law, and you can see this in acts like the Human Rights Act 1998. So it's clear we're not just making it up as we go along. Now, an exam tip here for you. If you do get a quick 2-mark question like identify 2 ways in which law can be made in the UK, you could just simply say Acts of Parliament and judicial precedent. It's easy points to pick up. Don't drop them. Moving on then. Parliament, the lawmaking machine. Now let's break down the cast of characters in Parliament. Who actually makes these laws? All right, so firstly we have the House of Commons. So think of this as, well, the engine room. It's made up of MPs, members of Parliament, who are elected by people like you and me. Most new laws, which are called bills, will start here. The Commons is like the kitchen, where most of the cooking happens. Then we have the House of Lords, and this is the second chamber. Peers here aren't elected, but they do have a sharp eye for detail, and their job then is to check and to suggest changes, to make sure no one's added too much salt or too many loopholes, and you can think of them really as a kind of quality control team. And then finally, as you can see, we have the monarch. So this is the king and the king's role. Now, the king gives what's called royal assent, and this is an official stamp of approval. But these days, this is just symbolic or ceremonial, really. There's no real monarch has ever actually refused a law for over 300 years. Even royalty wouldn't want to argue with Parliament. And then there's a little quick recall trick at the bottom there. So Commons create, the Lords look again, and the monarch makes it law. Now let's look at the journey of a bill. So I want you to imagine the bill as a wannabe law. It has to run a gauntlet, and it has to face debates, and it has to face scrutiny, and lots of drama. So let's walk through the steps, pace by pace. It starts with a green paper, and this is like a brainstorming phase. The government publishes ideas and asks, well, what do you all think? A bit like putting up a poll in a group chat and seeing what everyone wants for lunch. But, obviously illegal, with legal consequences. Then we have the white paper next. Now, this is government getting more serious. They narrow it down and say, well, here's our plan. So these are firmer proposals than the green paper, and they set out what the law is actually going to look like. Then we go to the first reading. Now, here's where the bill gets its first moment in the spotlight. It actually is read out, or the title is actually read out in Parliament. But we can't get too excited yet because there's no debate at this stage. It's a bit like introducing the act, but the MPs are just going to kind of clap politely for now. It's only by the second reading, really, that we have what you might call showtime. And now the MPs are going to debate the general ideas behind the bill. Is this a good idea? Do we need it? And this is where the fireworks can start. You might find there's arguments or big speeches and sometimes even, the odd groan-worthy joke. The next stage is the committee stage, and this is what you might call like the nitty-gritty phase of the bill. So we have a smaller group of MPs or Lords now, and they're going to look more closely at the bill, line by line. They may make tweaks, they might change clauses, generally sort of pick it apart, and then this leads to the report stage. So the whole House gets to see this revised bill, and more changes can be made even at this stage. It's a bit like bringing your essay back after your teacher's marked it, with all those red pen comments. And then we go to the third reading. So this is the final debate and vote in that House. So by now, everyone's checked, rechecked and corrected the bill. And it's the last chance for the MPs or Lords to speak up or catch any embarrassing typos. Other House, but wait, there's more. So the bill now travels to the other chamber. So from Commons to Lords, or vice versa, depending on where it started. And it goes through the same process all over again. It's like passing your homework to another teacher for a fresh look. And then finally we have royal assent. So the monarch signs off, so a signature, these days it's usually a nod, and the bill becomes official. It's actually now an Act of Parliament. Congratulations, it's a law. So in terms of a real example, you've got the Hunting Act 2004. Interestingly, this bill faced fierce opposition. In fact, it even got rejected in the House of Lords. But Parliament then used special procedures, the Parliament's Acts, to push it through. We'll look at this a little more closely next. Here's an exam tip for you. Explain how a bill becomes an Act of Parliament. Just walk through these steps in order. A good answer doesn't need lots of detail for each, but you need to make sure you list them, and maybe you could throw in some facts maybe to stand out as well. And I suppose it's a little bit like trying to get through airport security, isn't it? A bill going through the process. Lots of checks, lots of stamps, and everyone's watching very, very closely. So let's go back to that Hunting Act. So we're talking now about the Parliament's Acts 1911 and 1949. So what happens if a House of Lords, won't play nicely? What happens if they refuse to let a bill through? And as I said before, Parliament has this special move based on the Parliament Acts of 1911 and 1949. So if the Lords reject a bill twice, as they did with the Hunting Act, the elected Commons can say enough, and then they can send it straight to the monarch for royal assent. They basically sort of overrule it. It doesn't happen very often, but it is a crucial safety net, and it makes sure that elected MPs and by extension, us, the people, the public, have the final say. And as I said, the Hunting Act 2004 is a great example of this. And the key takeaway, I suppose, to take away now is that this system preserves the democratic power of the House of Commons, even if the House of Lords don't agree. Let's have a quick debate ourselves. What's good, what's bad about Parliament making laws? Well, in terms of strengths, Parliament's democratic. After all, MPs are elected by us to represent us. Also, laws are discussed and checked really thoroughly. The whole process is open. You can watch debates online. You can even visit in person as well. But in terms of weaknesses, this can be a very slow and complicated business, and it sometimes drags on for a long time. Political parties as well often dominate decisions, and the House of Lords isn't elected. I think that's important to remember. Some people think that's a little bit old school. And a key evaluation point is that this process is designed to balance democracy and careful scrutiny. But, when political parties control everything, there might not be as much real debate as you'd like. It's a bit like, doing group work and one person doing all the talking. And moving on now to devolved lawmaking and the Welsh Senedd. So since 1999, Wales has had its own parliament, the Senedd Cymru or Welsh Parliament. There are 60 members of the Senedd and they make laws about health, education, transport and the environment in Wales, and they're called Acts of the Senedd. Now, the process of a Senedd bill is similar to what happens in Westminster, but there's a bit of a Welsh twist. So you have an introduction where the bill is presented, stage 1, which involves debating the main ideas, stage 2, a committee inspects the details, like a kind of fine-tooth comb team, if you like. Stage 3 means more tweaks and changes. Stage 4 is a final vote. Are we in or out? And then again, we go back to royal assent, where it's signed into law by the king. Now, devolution brings decision-making a bit closer to the people, but this can lead, of course, to different rules in different parts of the UK. It's a little bit confusing then, a bit like everyone having their own house rules, if you like. It's confusing when you visit, but it works for that house, as it were. So moving on to the UK Constitution and the core principles. So interestingly, the UK doesn't actually have a single written constitution. There is no rule book, like they have in America or in the US. What we have actually is a bit of a patchwork of laws and traditions and famous writings. I suppose it's a little bit more like a scrapbook as well in terms of how it's made up. So what are the core principles though? Well, first of all, one of the core principles of the UK Constitution is parliamentary sovereignty. Now this is very important. Parliament can make or unmake any law and no court can overrule that. Now, this is a very important idea. It comes from the writer A.V. Dicey, and the strength of this is that it makes it very flexible and it actually makes changes quite easy. But weaknesses, of course, is that there's not many limits to Parliament's power. It's still key though devolution and human rights law have chipped away a little bit at the power of parliamentary sovereignty. Next, we move on to the rule of law. So everyone, this is the rule that everyone, including the government, must always follow the law. Now, again, this is based on Dicey's principles. Dicey said this means that no one, absolutely no one, is above the law, not even the Prime Minister. Now, the strength of this is clear, isn't it? It protects people from unfair treatment. But there is a weakness too. It doesn't always work perfectly. It's essential for justice, but it only works if Parliament sticks to it. We move on then to another key principle, which is the separation of powers. Now, power is shared between Parliament, now they make the laws, the government, who runs the country, and the courts, then, of course, the judges who then interpret those laws. So the laws are separated quite clearly there between those three branches. Now, the strength, of course, is that this means that it's spread out. So it stops one group from being too bossy. But there is some overlap, actually. So as a weakness, in the UK, Parliament and government can overlap a little bit. In terms of evaluation, this does provide important checks, but as we said, it isn't totally separate. And so there we have it. It's a bit of a whirlwind tour of lawmaking in the UK. You can use these points for revision or to explain to anyone who's curious as well. And I'll end with a little joke for you, a lawyer joke. Why don't law books ever get lost? Because they always have a case.